Hey, what's up guys? So Diona was just given free in the new event that's out right now, and it's out for over 2 weeks, so you have a long time to get this free Diona, and she's an amazing character. Since she is now technically free to play, I thought it'd be a good time to finally make a guide on her, and she's also been rated up on many banners, so if you already had her, you get another constellation, and her constellations, as we'll see, are very good. She's an amazing 4-star support. She can shield and heal at the same time, provides insane utility, good healing, and can oftentimes be the best healer in your specific team if you do need a shield. And there is a lot of confusion regarding how to build her, what weapon to use, if Sac or Fav is better, and regarding her general artifact sets. Before we get into it though, I want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested, subscribe if you're new, and let's get right into the video. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is go over her talents and the passive ones, and just talk about general Diona tips and gameplay, and go over her talents in a detailed way, but also without taking too long. So first of all, her passive talents, I'm just going to start with these because they're actually pretty good and oftentimes overlooked. The first one increases movement speed and decreases the stamina consumption of whoever's shielded. Now the movement speed is nice, but the stamina consumption decrease is actually pretty huge, especially on characters that charge attack a lot, like Hu Tao, or like the newly released Yanfei, right? If you're spamming charge attacks, having a 10% decreased stamina consumption, especially if you're dashing between charge attacks, it can be very expensive on your stamina, so having this is quite nice. Your second passive basically just decreases attack of opponents, which is okay, but not that big of a deal. Regarding her abilities, her elemental skill is pretty insane. It is a shield, and it's one of the best shields in the game. I would say Zhongli and Diona are the two relevant shields that make content much easier, especially when you're running against Geovishaps or just annoying enemies that attack fast. Having a shield can be a lifesaver. First of all, you can either tap this ability or hold it. There are situations for both, however, generally speaking, I recommend holding it because the shield is much stronger. The way this works is it'll throw icy paws on enemies, and they deal damage and they make the shield stronger based on how many hit. So when you press, it does 2 hits, 2 of those icy paws, and when you hold, it does shoot 5. On top of that, when you hold, as you can see here, the shield gains a 75% damage absorption bonus. So you'll notice that when you hold your shield, it is much stronger than when you just press it. On top of that, something to keep in mind is that your shield does scale off of your HP, your max HP, and it has a lot of cryo resistance. So against cryo enemies, your shield is insanely powerful. Now, when you look here, you can see the press cooldown is much lower than the hold cooldown. However, the uptime of the hold one is also much longer than the press one, which means that you can effectively keep your shield up for a very long time. And since when you hold, it does shoot these 5 paws, your shield can last up to 12 seconds, right? 2.4 seconds per paw. So if you hold, you can have a 12-second shield effectively, making it last 12 of the 15-second cooldown. So you only have a 3-second downtime, even without Sacrificial bow or anything, which is pretty great. And that's why, as you guys will see later in the video, I advocate, building HP, making your shield strong so that it can last a whole 12 seconds, making you literally invulnerable. So this talent is insane. You have a strong shield. You can either tap or hold. Again, there can be situations for both, but generally speaking, I recommend holding. Also, something I want you guys to know is with the shield, there is sort of a delay before it pops up after you use it. So as you see here, if I hold my E, there was a little delay where I was not invulnerable, so you can get hit during the cast time. And matter of fact, if you hold E and then swap characters, as you guys can see here, my character swapped before he got shielded. So it is something to keep in mind. If a Geovishap is about to jump on you and you just panic hold E, you'll still get hit because there is a slight delay. And something to keep in mind is that each icy paw is a separate hit, a separate instance of damage, which makes bows like Favonius and Sacrificial much easier to proc. So even if you're running sort of a low crit rate or not too high crit rate with a Favonius bow, since you are hitting 5 times, there is a much higher chance that you do crit and that you do proc the effect. Also, something really nice with her skill to keep in mind is that it does cleanse. It applies crowd to your character. Not only is her shield great, but it also does cleanse. For Diona's Elemental Burst signature mix, it is quite nice. It does do a bit of AoE damage constantly, which is why some people put a cryo goblet on her. But mainly what it does, apart from applying cryo and dealing a bit of damage, is heal your character a lot. The healing scales off of your max HP, and obviously a healing bonus circlet does help that. It lasts for 12 seconds out of 20, so a pretty decent uptime with a high energy cost of 80. Now this seems like a lot, but if you do stack energy recharge, if you have a Constellation 1, which helps but isn't needed, if you have a bow that generates particles like a Favonius bow or a Sac bow, you can make this energy cost a lot easier to achieve. And so overall, it's not too hard to have it up on cooldown, and it is a very good burst. This paired with her shield makes Diona a very useful healer because she has, again, this very strong shield and a healing ability that can keep your DPS or whoever's low full HP at all times. You just use their shield, use your burst, and then they're protected when they're low HP, and they get healed all the way up with this burst. Basically, this makes a field on the ground sort of like Bennett's. However, it does not buff your character with damage like Bennett does. Instead, it does continuous cryo damage and regenerates your HP. And keep in mind that at C6, it does buff your character, but we'll get into that later in the video. And regarding Diona's talent priority, both of them are important, but I would max the shield first for a stronger shield, and then max your burst for more healing. If your shield is strong enough, you can focus on your burst, but I recommend your shield, your elemental skill first. Now let's get into Diona's artifacts. We're going to talk about her artifact sets, which ones you should run on her, and there are a few good options, and then we'll also talk about the specific stats you want on every artifact piece. So first of all, for her artifact sets, there are a few good options, and before we actually get into it, I want to give you guys a disclaimer. Or like basically talk about some sets that don't work that some people think do. First of all, I think people know by now, but the Retracing Bolide set does not work with Diona. The 2-piece set increases your shield strength by 35%, but only to the character that's currently on field. So it'll buff your shield strength when you're on Diona, but as soon as you swap out, it stops working. If you want to run Retracing Bolide for a stronger shield, it has to be on your DPS character or whoever's on field, right? Because it will buff their shield, but not, it won't work for a support Diona. Also, regarding the new Tenacity of the Millilith set, it's a very good set, but I wouldn't recommend it for Diona because you do need to be doing like sort of off-field damage to constantly proc the 4-piece, which your burst kind of can, but generally speaking, I would recommend it on another support. So with that out of the way, let's talk about her best sets. For a general Diona build, I tend to recommend a Noblesse Oblige 4-piece. The 2-piece gives you a bit more burst damage, which is whatever, but the 4-piece is amazing, buffing your party member's attack by 20% for 12 seconds, which is actually pretty crazy, and it's every time you use your burst. So overall, this is the set I recommend. However, there are some other good options. First of all, Instructor can be good / better sometimes, and I run this when I'm running a reaction comp, because as soon as my Diona procs a reaction, it'll increase all my party members' elemental mastery by 120, which can be pretty huge if I'm running like a Vaporized Hu Tao or something. That being said, it is a 4-star set, so you do lose out on a lot of stats. But also that's not too big of a deal on Diona because you can still have one 5-star piece like your Sands for energy recharge, and then you don't have to min-max your substats on Diona because she is just your healer. So running an Instructor set with a bit worse substats can not only be lower investment, but can also be optimal if you do need the Instructor set. Keep in mind, Instructor does stack with other sets, obviously, so if you have like another character on Noblesse and Diona on Instructor, it could be very good. Lastly, I want to mention Maidens. I am personally a Maidens hater because most healers in the game, and Diona's no different, but most healers in the game do tend to heal enough to where having a set that buffs your healing can be pretty like okay / pretty good at low investment. But when you're trying to maximize your characters, you don't need that bonus healing and you'd rather give your team like attack if you can. So Maidens can be okay and can help a low investment Diona, but even then I would recommend other sets to buff your damage instead of buffing your healing. That's why, generally speaking, I like Instructor and especially Noblesse Oblige. Now for the specific artifact stats you want on every piece. Generally for Diona, good stats are energy recharge and HP. Energy recharge lets you use your burst on cooldown, HP buffs your shield, and your burst's healing. Now on top of that, crit rate can be really good, especially if you're running a Favonius bow on your Diona, because of how the effect works. So that being said, the artifact stats can sort of depend on the weapon you're running. Again, Favonius bow is an insane bow, and we'll talk about it in the weapon section, but having crit rate with that bow to make sure you constantly proc the effect is important. So that being said, here are the stats you'd normally want. For your Sands, I'd recommend energy recharge. HP can work too, just for like a stronger shield, but I like energy recharge on the Sands and is what I recommend so that you can have your burst up all the time. In terms of stat priority, I tend to prioritize having enough ER to use your burst all the time, then having enough HP to make sure your shield is strong, and then you can get some crit rate, especially if you're running Favonius bow. So ER or HP Sands can work. Energy recharge seems to be the best though for general Diona gameplay. For your goblet, it can depend. I tend to recommend HP once again for a stronger shield and more healing. But when you're like end game, if you're min-maxing and you have enough healing, if your shield is strong enough and it's not breaking, you can go for cryo damage bonus. If you just want your Diona to deal a bit more damage. Because my philosophy with healers, and I talk about this in a lot of healer videos, is that when you do enough healing, you can spend some of your resources if you're still like investing. You can spend some of your resources to make that healer deal more damage or do other things than just healing. That being said, Diona's shield is very important, so I like HP just to make sure it never dies. So I usually recommend HP on the goblet, but there are situations where you can go cryo if you want. For your circlet, here it also depends. There are 3 good ones: HP for a stronger shield and a bit of healing, healing bonus for just general, this is to make your burst heal more, or crit rate, especially if you're running a Favonius bow. I would basically recommend crit rate if you don't have enough crit on your substats to make sure your Favonius bow procs all the time. And again, we'll talk about that in the weapons because Diona's talent hits like 5 times, so Fav bow can be pretty easy to proc. But crit rate circlet can help for that because Diona has like okay scaling, so she actually does do a bit of damage. Overall though, to maximize your utility and healing, you either want an HP circlet or healing bonus. Again, I really like HP because it buffs your healing a bit and not as much as healing bonus. So if you just want to buff your alt's healing, go for healing bonus. But I like HP because it also buffs your shield. It gives you a bit more healing, but also makes your shield much stronger. And when I'm playing Diona, I mainly just care about keeping her shield up at all times so that my character doesn't die. Especially in the current Abyss 12, which might change soon. But the current Abyss 12 has Geovishaps, and a lot of content in the game has Geovishaps, and those guys are relentless and destroy your shield very fast. However, overall, her artifacts, her main stats on honestly every piece are variable, and there are a few good ones. But generally speaking, unless you need crit rate for Favonius bow, or you want to maximize healing on your burst with healing bonus, I like to go for just HP for a stronger shield and a bit more healing. Alright, now let's get into Diona's weapons, and we'll be comparing basically her two best ones, being the Favonius bow and the Sacrificial bow. There's also the Elegy at the end, which I don't have, but I will talk about in a bit. But first of all, let's talk about these two bows, because there's always a debate on which one's better. Also, I want to say that there's no reason to talk about other bows, because this is a free-to-play one. You do get a Favonius bow from a quest, so everyone should have one. And so I recommend using one of these two on Diona. Now, which should you use? Well, the answer, as with everything, is it depends. Sacrificial bow has the advantage of basically letting you be perma-shielded. It has a chance to reset your elemental skill, and it can do it quite easily because of how many times your elemental skill hits because of the 5 paws, which means you can hold your skill, get a long shield, and then use it again when you want to and have another shield. It also makes you generate twice as many cryo particles, which can be especially good if you're running other cryo characters like a Ganyu DPS. This bow giving you 2 shields is nice for utility. It's good for like an underinvested Diona if you need, if your shield is dying, or if you're just like playing poorly, getting hit by everything, having another shield can be nice. For those reasons, Sac bow is very useful. But Favonius bow also has a ton of strengths and is what I recommend generally speaking. Fav bow also gives you energy recharge, right? Both of these bows are energy recharge bows. But on top of that, this effect generates white particles, and it generates them very easily. And anytime you do proc this effect, and it gets better with the refinement, obviously mine's R4, but every time you do proc this effect, you generate white particles. And white particles are good for every character, because the way it works is, let's say you use a Sac bow, you press your E again, those generate cryo particles. Whereas white particles, the ones generated from Favonius bow, are good for everyone. And to summarize, to not talk about it for too long, I would say that Favonius warbow can give you more energy recharge if you're constantly proccing it, and can be better for ER gain, for general energy recharge. Sacrificial bow, however, is more comfy and has its advantages. It's more like a convenient, it's nice. But I do believe that Favonius bow does come out ahead, especially with high refinement, and if you have crit rate to constantly proc the effect and get more particles. A few things to note, however, Favonius warbow has the downside of needing crit rate, so maybe a bit more investment. You might want crit rate on at least substats. However, it does have a pretty high chance to proc, especially with refinement, and because, as I mentioned like 10 times now, her E does hit multiple times. And also something to keep in mind that's pretty important is you do get more particles on Favonius, notably because the cooldown is a lot lower. If we compare R4 versus R5, here it's 16 seconds, where it's 30 at R1, whereas Favonius warbow at refinement 4 is only 7.5 seconds. And if your weapon is unrefined, so R1, it's every 12 seconds, which is basically, every time you use your shield, you can proc this Favonius effect. Lastly, regarding the Elegy at the end, which was a rate up bow that most people don't have and that I don't, so I can't test this personally. However, I did so much research for this bow just so I could talk about it in case you have it. And the conclusion is basically it can be good if your team needs elemental mastery because of the effect. However, it does seem to be hard to proc, at least from other people's testing, because again, I don't have the bow. It does seem to be hard to proc, but if you can and if your team needs elemental mastery, it can be good because it also has an energy recharge stat. However, personally, I don't really like the bow and don't think it was worth pulling for, so I didn't go for it. But it can be a viable option, so I thought I should mention it in case you do have it. In terms of constellations, Diona actually has some really good ones, which is why having her on a banner, pulling on a banner that has Diona, can actually be pretty smart. Now keep in mind, she does not need constellations, she's a great character overall, but if you do have some, she does get better. Her C1 is great, it gives you 15 energy after your burst, effectively reducing the cost by 15, which is very nice. And this basically means you need less ER on your Diona. Your C2 is good, it makes your shield stronger and do more damage, so it's just nice. And on top of that, it shields your allies in co-op, which doesn't matter for things like Abyss and most hard content, but if you are playing co-op, this can be nice. C3 and 5 are actually surprisingly pretty good. As always, they buff your talent levels, and on Diona this is great, stronger shield and more healing. Her C4 is only relevant for DPS Diona, which I don't want to talk about, but I'll probably be forced to make a video on. And her Constellation 6 is pretty broken. It basically just buffs your burst quite a lot. The main thing is that it increases your elemental mastery to whoever's in the field, so kind of like a Bennett burst. So when you use your burst, swap to your character. If they are a reaction carry, they'll do a lot more damage because you gain 200 elemental mastery, which is huge when your HP is above 50%. On top of that, it also buffs your healing. When the character is under 50% HP, you gain 30% healing, which is pretty nice. So yeah, overall, Diona's constellations are very good. Honestly, like all of them except C4 are pretty great. So while she does not need constellations, if you do have them, they are good. For Diona's teams, it's similar to Bennett, whereas she can be placed in basically any comp because she's a shielder and a healer. If you're wondering which Abyss team she should be in, whichever team would need the shield more is what you can put her in, or if you need Elemental Mastery if you have her C6, or again, if you're running a Cryo DPS or a Cryo Quickswap team, or something where you want the cryo particles that Diona generates, she can be especially good there. Also, if you're running her with a Favonius Warbow, since she generates white particles, you can give it to whichever character needs energy. Energy is good on Diona, so she might want to catch them, but let's say running a Shao DPS and your Shao doesn't have enough energy recharge, you can hold E on Diona and then immediately swap the Shao and he will catch all the particles, giving him more energy, making him need, again, less energy recharge. So while your team comps for Diona don't matter too much because she is a very flexible healer, she shields and she heals, there are some situations where she can be especially good, and when you're choosing in which team to put her in, right, in Abyss you have 2 teams, I would take those factors I mentioned into consideration and try to put her on whichever team needs the shield the most. So that's about it for Diona. She is free now. Make sure you get her because she's an amazing healer. I can't stress that enough. She's a very strong unit that I often use in one of my Abyss teams. And I'm sure you guys know this by now, but having a shield just makes Genshin so much easier and it's really sick. Apart from that though, the Abyss is about to change, so I can't wait to, test the new Abyss, maybe make a guide for it. And now physical characters are going to be a lot better, so I get to use Razor again, physical Kaching maybe. I get to test a lot of new characters, especially with the new Pale Flame set. And so obviously let me know what you guys want to see next because there's a lot that came out in 1.5 and a lot of stuff that I still have to test. Anyways though, I hope this guide was helpful. Follow me on Twitch if you want, join the Discord, sub if you're new, and that being said, I hope this guide was helpful, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Now let's talk about DPS Diona.